everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Kaelyn and I'm joined here with my friend Gur. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi guys, I'm Gurmehar. To all of Kaelyn's followers in the US, I am her floor mate and we go to the same college. And hi to everyone from India who's watching. I'm so excited to introduce you to Kaelyn, like I said, who is my floor mate.
And today's video is going to be all about applying to Oxford as an international student. As you may already know, I am from the United States. I was born and raised in California.
I am from India, Delhi, born and raised in Punjab.
And so we're going to be talking a little bit about our experiences applying to Oxford, as well as being graduate students here at Oxford and the application process and all of that. So if you want some more information on applying to Oxford, then stick around. So the first question we have here is, why did you choose to study at Oxford rather than staying in your home country?
I think I had like various reasons, but I think one of those would be that just the resources, the academic resources in Oxford are extremely good.
Yeah.
Not saying that back home they aren't as good enough, but I think adding to the fact that Oxford is a brilliant university, and I really did want to come here. One, for the sake of it being Oxford. I mean, I'm not going to deny that. I mean,
yeah,
I'm really not. Okay, I wanted to say that, hey, I went to Oxford. But I think more than that, the fact that they have way too many, like a lot of academic resources. I love my supervisor here. I really wanted to work with her. And she's someone who a bunch of my friends have previously worked with. Okay. So I had heard a lot about her. I'd read a lot of her work. And she was just someone that I knew could help me think about the Indo-Pak conflict in ways that I haven't before, and to look at, and I'm doing IR, so I'm looking at the track 2 bits of things. But yeah, I think this is one of the major reasons why I applied to Oxford.
Yeah. And then in addition to that, did you kind of always know that you were going to apply to Oxford for
your
master's?
always. Yeah. I always knew it. I think because you can't, like, I think you need to have at least 1 year of like the plan to be at least a year ahead, because then you're doing your internships in a way that support the degree that you want to do, that show proof of your interest in the thesis that you want to write or the research that you want to do. So I think for me, I always knew what the course that I wanted to do in Oxford, the person that, like my supervisor, who I wanted to do it with, and all the internships I would need to get that course and make my application stronger. But what about you?
That's a very different experience.
Yeah.
So
why did you come to Oxford? Because America has brilliant universities.
So a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
So first of all, it is actually cheaper for me to study here at Oxford for my master's than it is for me to stay in the US, which is something that not a lot of people are aware of, and what I try to tell my viewers.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, I study slavery in the British Atlantic, so a lot of the sources that I wanted to look at were actually more readily available here at the British Library and at Oxford than they would have been in the US.
Yeah.
So it actually made more sense to get my research started here that I wanted to kind of carry on in the future, to kind of get it started here with the supervisor. But I actually didn't know that I wanted to go to Oxford. I knew that I was going to eventually go to graduate school, but when the time came where I was going to be applying, I actually started really thinking about applying outside of the US, and actually ended up applying to Oxford, Cambridge, and a couple of the other UK schools.
You did do a summer school in Cambridge. Tell us a bit about that. And like, was that experience important or like significant in like you deciding to apply to Oxford and Cambridge?
Yeah, absolutely. So I studied for a summer at Cambridge. I took a 6-week course, which was the Cambridge PKP program, and I did make a video about that, so I'm going to link that down below. During that program, I actually studied law, and that allowed me to kind of start using skills in legal history that I hadn't really used before. And then I realized that that was something I really wanted to pursue, and that I really liked research. So even though I do plan on still doing a law degree, I decided that I was going to kind of change course a bit and actually pursue legal history academia, not just law.
Fair enough. I have like one question, and I think a lot of people would be thinking this, because you spoke of how expensive education in the US is, and you know, back home everyone thinks to like going to the US is far more cheaper than coming to the UK because of how expensive UK in general is. My question is, tell us a bit about the myths of the financial aid in the UK. And I
in the UK or in the US?
Oh, sorry, in the US. Sorry.
So in the US, the financial aid is both merit-based, but also financial dependence-based.
Yeah.
So if you actually are lower income, you have some opportunities, but it really depends on the school. Some of the Ivy Leagues have a little bit more money in their pockets to actually help students. But then of course those students actually have to get into those schools, which does require a lot of academic rigor as well as time and potentially money to actually get the scores to get in there. And then you have schools like UCLA, which is a public university, and although I managed to get need-based grants, and I actually got a couple merit-based grants, which allowed me to help pay for my degree, and studying in-state was cheaper, the actual ability to reach the bracket for financial aid is a little challenging, and money isn't just happily given away. Like you have to really demonstrate that you need it, and everybody's circumstances are a little different, and it's really hard to kind of demonstrate on paper the actual financial need that you have. On top of that, like applying for master's degrees in the US in particular, there's very little funding for graduate studies. Because undergraduate studies and community college is seen as more necessary than graduate studies, which makes sense. But on top of that, it makes it so that somebody that would need a master's in order to go into the top schools for a PhD, for example, would have to pay that tuition for 2 years. So it was actually cheaper for me to come here for 1 year than to stay
in the US for 2 years. And you know, like the US has great financial aid, and I applied for it, and I got into one of these US universities that I applied to, which is Columbia, which is also one of those Ivies, which has a lot of money. And almost all of my tuition was taken care of, and it was off, but I think the living expenses were way too much. And when I put together the amount I would spend for a 1-year degree in New York and Columbia was the amount I would have to spend for a 1-year degree in Oxford. Oxford was literally half. Like the UK is very expensive, but the fee and the living expenses put together were half of the Ivies, and half after the financial aid. So so I think it's for me and the tuition is way too much in the US, and I think for me I think financial aid is kind of a myth in the US for me. And especially
it is for a lot of people.
And for a lot of people, and I think but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply, but especially when you're coming from like India, and especially when you're coming from like Commonwealth countries, just know that you have a bunch of scholarships that the UK universities are willing to give you because you're from these countries.
And we'll talk a little bit more about financial aid throughout this video. So what was the application process like as an international student? And we're going to talk about the components of the application, deadlines, and a little bit about your specific course, because I've gotten a couple questions about the application process as a history student.
So the application process, for me it started very early because I applied for the Rhodes. For me, I was applying for scholarships, and I was only applying to colleges and universities that offered huge chunks of scholarships and had a lot of funding. I did not apply to places that did not have funding, mostly because even though I knew I could have gotten an admission there, or it could have been like my application would be accepted, I wouldn't be able to afford it at all. So I was only looking at the bigger schools with bigger fundings, and I think that's when it started. So I applied for the Rhodes Scholarship, which meant that I had to have my essay, my writing samples, my personal essay, my writing samples, all like 6 recommendations, my CV, all of it set and ready to go by June, which meant that between the Rhodes application to the final I did the November deadline for Oxford, and Oxford has 2 deadlines: the November deadline, the Jan deadline, and the later March deadline. But it's advisable that if you want to be eligible for Oxford's internal scholarships, you apply by the Jan deadline. So between June and November, I had all this time to better my application, better my Rhodes application to fit the Oxford standard. So I knew, that was the process for me.
Okay.
Do you want me to give any specific details?
Maybe even just like the components of the specific Oxford application.
So again, I'm doing modern South Asian studies, and I think each course has different things that you will need to apply for the course. So for me, I had to do 2 writing samples, 1 personal statement, 3 letter of recommendations, CV, and you also have to give the language test, which I did not give. It's there for English students, so it's there for Indian students and international students, that they expect you to give the language test. I have ethical problems with the whole concept of these tests, and I was like, I'm not going to give it because all of my education has been in English. So I did write them a letter and had it waived off, and I gave like the proof that I had done all of my education in English, and then this was unnecessary. Yeah,
Okay.
those were things in my application. Yeah.
So my application was relatively similar. So I applied for the US History strand for the MST, and for mine I had a writing sample. I think they offered that you could give 2, and I think I did.
Yeah.
And I had sent the first part of my undergraduate thesis as well as an essay I wrote at Cambridge that was on legal history, so I figured that it would be helpful. And then I had to have a statement of purpose, the letters of recommendation, CV, and then my transcripts.
And transcripts. Sorry, I just completely forgot. That's important too.
Yeah, and also send them like way ahead of time because it takes forever to actually make it to Oxford and for them to process it. That was something that nobody really talks about, and I wanted to make sure I mentioned in this video.
Oh, sorry, can I quickly say this? A lot of Indian South Asian school systems don't align with the Western school timings. Know that Oxford knows this, and a lot of universities are very aware of the fact that our dates and timings for schools and when our results come out and when we get a final degree. So you can always give the printed transcript that you get from the current transcript, the current marks. It doesn't have to be your final grade, but the current grade. Have it stamped and signed by your college, and then send it in, and that's acceptable. You don't have to have your final degree.
Yeah, and I think also with deadlines, so there was the November deadline. I think I submitted in the January deadline because I needed to finish my writing sample because I needed that first part of my thesis. And also, I do consulting with students that are applying to Oxbridge, and I've had a couple different consultations where people are applying from, say, Australia or outside of the UK or even the US, and because their terms are slightly different, it makes the deadline a little challenging. So just be diligent if you are applying to Oxford that you are able to send in a unofficial transcript or at least some kind of recognition of your past grades, and that you're going to have a strong enough writing sample in time for the application deadline, because that's going to be one of the most important components.
And the hardest. The hardest,
absolutely. So I also got a question from a follower asking what part of the application you think was most important to your acceptance from your department.
The writing sample. The writing sample. It was the most important. I genuinely think it was the most important because your writing sample is basically a proof of your academic rigor and how well you're going to do in the course. More than your grades, more than your personal statement, more than your CV. I think it's a writing sample that shows how deeply invested you are in academia in general. So I think it was the hardest part for me because that was something I had to spend a lot of time on. And for me it was particularly difficult because, and which is something I'm still struggling with, was those writing samples had to be very academic. While I'm someone who finds writing easy and something that comes very naturally to her, and then the fact that I feel academic writing and like just writing in general and non-fiction writing are so different. So for me it was just it was the hardest part. What was the hardest for you?
So actually for me it was the statement of purpose. For history, who you work with and the past research that you've done is super important. And like who you've worked with and those kinds of things. And so I think that in terms of the department's acceptance, you actually demonstrating that you're aware of what sources you want to have access to and which supervisor you want to work with was super important. And then I would say the writing sample was secondary to that.
I think the personal statement is also very tricky. Because to write your personal statement, you really need to be 100% clear of why you want to do this course. And who you want to do this with. And I think to know why you want to do something is tricky because like those are internal questions.
Also, little plug, I have made a video on how to write a statement of purpose, so I'm going to link that down below as well that you guys can check out and use as a reference. And if you want some help on your personal statement or your statement of purpose, you can also schedule a consulting appointment with me. So just a quick little plug. All right, so what is the value of your Oxford degree back in your country?
Okay, so this one's tricky because mine's a 1-year master's and I can't. But if I wanted to have a career in academia and wanted to teach, this wouldn't hold much value in my teaching career. For me to go into academia full on and apply for PhDs back home, I would need to have done a 2 years master's, which is an MPhil in Oxford, and Cambridge doesn't offer that 2-year MPhil. So Oxford, I think, is between Oxford and Cambridge. If you want to do your PhD back in India, you would ideally pick the MPhil in Oxford because it's 2 years. What's the value? Like I said, I didn't want to teach eventually. So the value that this degree gives me is like way more clarity. So I'm doing IR. I'm doing specifically South Asian IR, and my thesis is very focused on the conflict and India and Pakistan. And I think the fact that my degree is designed to look at this specific area that I'm so interested in and in life, I think that would be the biggest advantage of this degree.
Yeah. So for me back in the US, you don't actually need a master's to apply for most PhDs.
Yeah.
But I wanted to be able to get into the top programs.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to kind of finesse my research question before I went into a PhD program.
Yeah.
So and then on top of that, I wanted access to sources. So the value of this degree, I think, is slightly more personal. But on top of that, it does signal to the schools that I'm applying to for a PhD that I'm very serious about my subject and that I'm very dedicated to this particular question and this particular project. So I think that's the value, and then also just the just general value of having Oxford on your resume, of course.
I mean, there is a certain sense of elitism there. And it's unfair, but
it has a certain amount of value. For sure. So now we're going to talk a little bit about financial aid and how both of us are funding our Oxford degrees. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Scholarship, guys. I'm going to full on scholarship. So I'm going to Oxford Valenfeld Hoffman Scholarship. My fees is paid by the Oxford funding and my living expenses are paid by the Valenfeld Hoffman Scholarship. But it's like a one big thing. But yeah, I'm here on a scholarship, like I said. If I didn't have a scholarship, I probably wouldn't be able to afford this education because it is extremely expensive.
Yeah, especially as an international student.
Especially as an international student, because our fees is double the amount that UK kids have to pay. And I think the money is a big deterrence when it comes to people applying, but just apply for the scholarships. I did not expect that I would get one, but I applied for every single scholarship that was there. And I think what's very interesting, what I do want to talk about, especially when we're talking about Oxford, is my college, Somerville. Somerville has this Oxford India Sustainable Development thing settled here. So Somerville College offers a lot of funding to Indian students. So there is the Radhakrishnan Scholarship, then there is the Thatcher Scholarship, then there's the Indira Gandhi Scholarship, then there's also the Valenfeld Hoffman Scholarship, then there's also the Rhodes Scholarship. So when you're applying to Oxford, just see what college offers more scholarships and fundings to you and what country you're coming from, especially when you're coming from countries like India, Pakistan or Bangladesh.
So for me, I'm actually paying for my degree with financial aid, so through loans. I applied for US funding. So I actually have a subsidized loan through the US loan system, through FAFSA. And I was actually a little bit late in deciding I wanted to apply to Oxford. So that is something that I would caution against, is if you're thinking about applying to Oxford, definitely be thinking about it ahead of time. I just didn't even know it was an option for me, to be honest. I found out probably in late October that I was going to be applying, and that I had the sources, and that my paper was going to be good enough. So I wasn't able to apply for a bunch of scholarships at the time, but for me, the balance between investing in this degree so that I could then get a PhD that would be funded at a higher tier university was going to be more important to me than not receiving the degree.
For sure.
So I think for me it was mostly an investment, but I absolutely realized that that is a privilege that I have, and that even though I'm taking out an extreme amount of loan debt, I am confident that I'm going to be able to pay it off. And that is not something that a lot of people can say, and that's definitely something that I feel privileged to have, and that I'm very gracious to have. But I also realize that that is not the reality for everyone.
A lot of people, for sure.
So I just want to make sure that I mention that, because everybody's way of funding things is going to be very different, and everybody's circumstances are different.
Very different,
Now we're going to get into slightly more personal questions about our experiences here at Oxford as graduate students. So because we're international students, did you experience culture shock when arriving at Oxford?
Can I say something? Yes and no.
Okay.
No, because we've been colonized by this country for a very long time, so it stays with us in our memories, in our genetic beings. So yeah, it wasn't as much a cultural shock. Sorry guys, I had to say it.
I appreciate it.
I mean, I'm bitter, dude. I'm bitter. 200 years. Doesn't really leave you that easy. But having said that, it's different. There is a cultural shock, yes, because everything is so clean, everything is so nice. I think the biggest cultural shock that for me was opening the morning newspaper one day and realizing, and like going through my newspaper on my phone back home, was realizing like just the difference of what is the biggest concern in both our countries. I think that was my big cultural shock.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So I wouldn't say that I necessarily experienced culture shock, just because, I mean, I live in America, which was originally a British colony. But I definitely experienced culture shock in the sense that the academic culture at Oxford is very different. Back in the US, I studied the history of race and gender, and I also took classes in African American studies, gender studies, etc. And so the actual focus of the studies here are slightly different, and also it's not as like racially diverse as I'm used to. I grew up in California and also attending schools like UCLA, which to me didn't even seem as racially diverse as it could have and should have been. But coming here, it is definitely a bit of a shock how certain language is still used, like the word primitive is still used by professors. Yeah, like terms that in American vernacular, like academic vernacular, would not be okay, is still in play here. And a lot of the professors are white and male, and so that's been a bit of a shock for me, just because I worked with such a diverse group of academics back at UCLA, and it is a bit of a difference.
I think surprisingly for me, I mean, there's definitely that, but I think because I'm doing South Asian studies, my classroom still feels very brown, very much like home. We have a bunch of Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Sri Lankans, a European and a British guy. So it feels, so the diversity in my classroom is not, that's not something I felt was an issue, because that felt like home. Yeah, and I'm very glad for it. But in the university, 100% that's a case.
So it's just slightly different, and also the kind of focus of what people are studying in history is slightly different here. Like I've noticed a little bit more political historians and those kinds of things, whereas back in the States, or definitely back at UCLA in my department, there was just a bit of a more diverse grouping of projects. And like I was studying women in slavery, and other people were studying like black radicalism and those kinds of things. So it was just slightly more diverse, and I got to work with a bunch of professors that were in like such different fields of research that were all in this one space and could collaborate. All right, so what do you miss most about being home while being here?
Everything. I miss home every day. I think about Delhi, I think about India Gate, I think about my mom, I think about my sister, my friends, I miss everything about home. But then I also love being here, and I love my friends here, and I love like the family that I have here, made of these guys who make life so nice. But I miss everything.
It's definitely different. I've definitely never felt homesickness in the same way. Because I've never been out of California. I mean, I went to UCLA, which was about 6 hours drive from my hometown. But if there was ever like an emergency, like for example, I had to leave LA once because there was a fire near school, and so I decided to just drive home. And it's only a 6-hour drive, but here I'm an 11-hour flight. That's very expensive, away from my family and friends. But I will say I have found like an amazing support system here. And that has been I've been really lucky in that respect, because if I didn't have that, I just don't know how I'd be able to cope. For sure. Because it's just so like, just the academic rigor, but also the kind of isolationist academic culture at Oxford. Like everybody is basically does their work in their room or at the library, and there's not the same kind of like academic
Study
community
groups. Yeah.
that I would have experienced,
Yeah.
that I did experience, say, in undergrad.
Yeah.
So that aspect's slightly different,
Yeah.
and I definitely miss home, and I'm very excited to be going back
Yeah.
for break, and
I'm not going back. I'm here.
Aw.
Because the flights are so expensive.
Yeah, that's another part.
It's
Is like
just a-
actually getting home is
Yeah.
such a challenge because it's so expensive.
Yeah.
And
That's a challenge for sure.
Yeah.
Especially like Christmas time, it just peaks, and then you're like, huh, I just keep this money safe for like next time I want to go home.
Yeah.
But yeah.
yeah, I'm lucky that I get to go home next week, and I'm very much looking forward to the food back at home because the food is a little bland.
Yeah. I mean, imagine she's saying it's bland, guys. I'm dying here. I just like carry chilies in my pockets. I'm just like,
No, I'm definitely like next time
hot sauce.
when I'm coming back from break, I'm bringing like salsa and chili flakes and like.
You know what I want to bring? I actually texted a friend and I was like, I need you to come to, you know, one of our friends was like, if you're planning a vacation at any point, I need you to come to London, and just so that you could get me achar. So achar is like pickles, but like whoa, like spicier than like the pickled cucumbers you get here.
That's so funny.
Achar, guys, I want achar.
No, I definitely miss the food back at
Yeah.
home. And the second I get off the plane,
Yeah.
you best believe I'm going to Boba Guys and getting bubble tea. All right, and then to wrap up this Q&A,
Yeah.
what are your plans for after the degree at Oxford? Do you plan to stay here for a DPhil or go elsewhere? What do you plan
I think
to
I'm
do?
definitely applying for like a DPhil here, and like for those who don't know, a DPhil is a PhD at Oxford. So I will apply for a PhD. Let's see if I get in. If I get in, let's see if I have the funding, and if I get the funding for it. And a lot of these things are dependent, but I do eventually, once I'm done with my education, I want to go back home. Yeah, like that's a certain. I'm not staying here. For anyone who was wondering, I miss home too much. Everything that I want, need, all my work is based in home. So yeah, I think my future plan at this point is like, be an expert in the kind of work that I want to do, and then go back home and do it.
Yeah, that's the same for me. I plan to actually go back to the US for my PhD just because of my own personal goals, but also because I do want to actually get a law degree and I want to practice civil rights and constitutional law. There are plenty of issues in the United States that I want to be a part of the solution, and I can't do that from across the Atlantic.
You can't, you can't,
I am very grateful for my education here, and I'm glad that I get to work with the sources and have this experience, but I definitely want to take what I've learned back to the United States and apply it to my work there, and hopefully publish a bit.
Also I do want to publish, I do want to publish like a serious academic book, guys. Pop political nonfiction is cute, but I do want to grow up.
All right, well, thank you so much for being in this video with
Thank
me.
you for having me.
And this is the end of the video. If you want, I'm going to leave Gur's information down below, and as well as all of the links that we mentioned, such as the scholarship, so that way you guys can look into it for yourselves. And if you guys enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you aren't, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.
See you. Bye.
He started with hello on a summer afternoon. I lost myself and everybody